To join a live broadcast of Python Live Lessons, tune into my YouTube channel Sebastiaan Mathôt every Tuesday, 10 p.m. New Delhi time, 6 p.m. Central European time, and 9 a.m. Los Angeles time. Hope to see you then, and for now, enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4, the 5th episode of Python Live Lessons. My name is Sebastiaan Mathôt. Hi everyone. Hi Eduardo. Ole. What I want to do today is pick up where we left off during the episodes of the previous episodes, in which we made a Python module called Markdown Code Exec. Yeah, happy to be here too. Happy to see that there are some viewers. And what we're going to do today is actually take the Python module that we made during the previous episodes and turn it into a command line application. So something that you can run from the console or the terminal or the command line, however you want to call it. So let's actually very briefly say what our project does. Markdown Code Exec, and as always, so the main reason for me to do this live rather than to actually just record it and put it online is to allow a few questions, right? So if you have questions, interrupt me at any time, and I will try to engage with the questions. So what does our project do, Markdown Code Exec? So it essentially takes a Markdown file as input, and Markdown is text, and with a particular simple markup syntax that allows you to indicate, for example, that something is code. So here between the 3 backticks, we have a bit of Python code that says print hello world, and the attributes between the curly braces indicate that that is actually Python code and that we want to capture the output. Now, in the capturing of the output, that's where our Markdown Code Exec application comes in, or a module. Right now it's just a module. And what does that mean? Well, it literally means that it just captures the output of the print statement, print function call, which is hello world in this case, and actually inserts it into the Markdown after the code that was executed. That's what it does. What have we done so far? So in the first episode, we created the sketch, so sort of a basic outline of what the program is supposed to do approximately. Then we turned that sketch into a nice Python module or Python package that you can import, as you are used to doing with other Python modules. Then we actually uploaded our project to Git and GitHub, just to keep track of the versions and everything. And today, we're going to turn our program into a command line program. So what does that mean? It means you no longer have to start Python and then import it, but rather that you can actually execute it as you can execute a normal command line program. And how do we actually want to execute our program? Well, let's call the program Markdown Code Exec. And then I want to be able to call it in 2 different ways. I want to be able to sort of use the -i or -- input argument and then specify an input file, and the -o and then the output file, right? And that would mean read from in.md and write the processed output to out.md. And I want to have a slightly fancier, for the sort of the code phonetics, fancier way of being able to actually run this application. I want Markdown Code Exec to be able to read directly from the standard input and to write to the standard output. If that doesn't mean much to you, basically the idea is that in Linux and also on Mac OS, you have a sort of concept of sort of a standard input that is sort of fed into your program, and a standard output, which is what the program prints out. And then there are tools with which you can connect these things. This sounds a little bit abstract, but the example that you see here, that get in.md, means print out the contents of in.md. Then sort of the vertical line means channel that into what comes next. What comes next is Markdown Code Exec, so our program. That will print it out to the standard output. And then this thing indicates that we want to write that output from the standard output to the file called out.md. In other words, in a slightly less user-friendly way, it does the exact same thing as the thing before. But the reason I want to be able to allow also this more complex way of using the command line app is that then you can use the app in a chain of other tools that you might use, right? But most people would, of course, do the thing above. Okay, so let's actually switch to Rapunzel, the code editor, and let's get to work. So what we have here is on the left-hand side, we have the application as we've been working on so far. We have our module called Markdown Code Exec. And you know what? Let's actually take a look at how we can use it. So here we have a file called demo.md. I will change the working directory. Oh, and also go back to, there we go. Go back to this mode. And then in order to actually read from demo.md, we created in our module Markdown Code Exec a function called parse file here. And I can use it in the following way. You can watch back the previous episodes if you want, if you're unclear on how that works. But basically I can say from Markdown Code Exec, I'm typing this directly in the terminal, import parse file, and then parse file, and then an input file, demo.md, and let's say demo.out.md, and then it will actually process the contents from demo.md and write it to demo.out.md. Here we are. And what you see here we have this thing that should be captured, and indeed the output is captured and inserted below. So this is the way you can use it as a module. How are we now actually going to turn this into an application? There are a few ways to do it. I will show you my preferred way. And the first thing that you need to do is create a so-called entry point. And the entry point is just a function that is called, and that basically is the command line app. And I am going to put that in a separate module that I call _app.py. The underscore indicates that it's not intended to be used from the outside. That's what the underscore means. And then in this, I'm going to actually define a function, and I'm also going to call it app. Right now, I'm going to leave the function empty. So I just say app. Now, how can we then, so this is just adding a function to the module, so it's not yet a command line app. If we want to turn this into a command line app, I'm going to create a file, a top level file, and I will call it Markdown Code Exec.py. There it is. And I will very simply, in that file, Markdown Code Exec, I will say from Markdown Code Exec _app import app. And then I will do something that is a little bit special. I will say if name equals main call the app. That's all. Sounds a bit mysterious, but let me explain what this means. So basically this is simple, right? This is just an import statement that imports this function from the app module. Then what we're doing here is we're checking whether the magic variable name has the has the value __main__. And why? Well, because Python is hard-coded, is built such that this is only true for a script that you call directly. So here in this module there will also be an _name variable, but it will have a different value. And only if you call a script directly from as a top-level script will this condition be true. I hope that makes some kind of sense. If not, please don't hesitate to ask questions. And then we can execute it, actually. So let me actually open a terminal here. Open Tilix. Yeah, should have prepared that better. There we are. So now I have a terminal here. And if I now say Python and I say Markdown Code Exec.py, I execute that file. That works, but it does nothing, of course, because we still have to actually do everything, right? So basically it doesn't crash, but it also doesn't do anything. So let's switch back. So what we need to do in our app is basically do a few things. Yeah, that's what, okay, happy to clarify, that's the clarified, the __name thing for you. Yeah, We need to do a few things. Basically, we want to, from this module, what we want to do, we're actually not going to use the parse file function, but we're going to use the simpler function called parse text. And that takes text, so not a file name, but just text that's already been written, and it returns new text that has been processed. So it takes the original markdown as input and then returns the processed markdown as output. So that's what we want to do. Now let's say that we already know sort of what the input file is. So we say in markdown in, for example, is demo.md, and markdown out is demo.out.md. Of course, we don't know. This is just for explanatory purposes, because later we don't know this, right? Exactly how this works. What these files are called, because they are specified on the command line. But let's say that we actually do know what they are. Then what we can do is say, okay, we're going to read, let's call this actually path in and path out. Right. Then we can say, okay, with open path in sfd md in is fd.read. So we read all the contents from the input path. Then we actually need to call the parse text function. So we say from markdown code exec import parse text. And I say md out is parse text md in. And then we have done the heavy lifting already. And then we simply need to say with open path out sfd. And we need to specify actually that this file is for writing. So up fd.write md out. So this would actually work to the extent that, oh, I should have 2 empty lines here for style. This would work to the extent that it would actually read from demo.md and it would write to demo.out.md. But of course, we don't always want to do that. We want to be able to specify that on the command line. So how are we going to do that? For that, we actually need to use the so-called argparse module from Python. This is part of the Python standard library, and it allows you to basically get the command line arguments that were passed to your program in a standardized way. And Nipodem is saying, just as a reminder, I'm still interested in how Django routers work, the REST framework. Well, thank you. Perhaps I should switch to Django and beef up the number of live viewers. So it is noted. I'm also not personally so familiar with Django, so it's not just out of and I need to know, of course, how something works in order to explain it. And then Atiche asks, what's the significance? Does that refer to the comment about Django, or does it refer to something that I did? Please clarify if you want. So what we're going to do is use the argparse module, I'm picking up here, to actually read the command line arguments that were passed to our script. And it works like this. I will type it, and then you will sort of understand how it works, because it is relatively intuitive. Let's actually close this because we don't need it anymore. So up, there we go. So we create a parser object. And then, so Atiche, you say, see my comment. I don't know what comment that refers to actually. If you specify that a bit more detail, then I will try to answer. And then to the parser object, we add some arguments. And it goes like this. Up. Input markdown file. So what we're saying is that our command line app should be able to accept an input file, either specified by -i, as I showed in the example, or by the more elaborate way of saying -- input. It should be a str, and this is the help thing. I will show you in a bit what it means why this is useful. If you don't specify, and the magic is such that it will automatically go to a variable that is called parser.input. You will see that in a bit. Oh, I want to do something very similar, of course, for the output. Output markdown file. That's it. There are only 2 arguments. And then I say args is parser.parse args. And these lines will do basically the magic of parsing the arguments that are passed to the command line. You can do many more things as well. Here I'm having a very sort of standard criterion, but you can have all kinds of checks and different ways to specify arguments. The argparse module is very versatile, but in this case we're just basically saying you can specify input or you can specify output. And then we have the path in, which will be args.input, and path out, which will be args.output. This is actually enough already for the basic way of calling the function with these arguments. So let's actually go here to the terminal. And then if I say Python markdown code exec.py, right now I'm still doing it in kind of an ugly way by first calling the Python interpreter and then the name of the script with .py. Once we actually create a Python package that you can install with pip, we will do that in future episodes. This is actually no longer necessary, and we can just call it as markdown code exec without anything, which is nicer. But the general idea would be the same. Now, if I execute this, oh, we get a, oh wait, yeah. Did I, oop. Yeah, okay. Sorry, if I execute this and I say help, that's what I wanted to do. You see now the help, right? And that's why it makes sense to actually specify the help specify the help when creating the argparser. That will be used here. And you see also that you get some explanation of how you can actually use the command line app. Now, if we want to actually run it, we say python code exec.py input demo.md, output demo.out.md, and it will do basically the same as we did before, right? Actually demo.out, demo.out.md already existed, but if let's actually, just for the sake of argument, say demo.out2.md, if I switch back, you see that now we have demo.out2.md that was created. This, however, doesn't allow us yet to actually also read from the standard input and write to the standard output, because you see here that we're assuming that path in is actually a file name, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a file name. So what happens if we don't actually specify an input or an output? Well, then these variables will actually become none, and we can make use of that. So we can say if path in is none, then here we're going to do something that we're going to read from the standard input, else we're going to read from the file. All right, so here we didn't specify an input, so we need to read from the standard input. How do you do that? Well, there are a few ways to do it, but basically I see your comment, Morpheus. I will get back to it in a second. We will say md_in is first an empty string, and then for line in sys.stdin, md_in plus equals line. So basically sys.stdin is like the content of a file, and you read it line by line. We start with an empty string, and we just concatenate the lines that we read to the standard input until the standard input is exhausted, and that will go automatically. We don't need to check. And then we've basically read everything from the standard input. Something similar we can do with, wait, actually, let me answer Morpheus' comment. Would you say that argparse has advantages over similar libraries except for being in the standard library? I used docopt many years ago, but there are probably better ones today. The only 2 libraries that I know for argument parsing are optparse and argparse, where argparse is basically the improved version of optparse, both of which are in the standard library, I think. I don't know docparse, so I cannot really docopt, so I cannot really comment as to whether it is better or worse. I can't imagine that there are many things that you would want to do that argparse doesn't do, actually. So in that sense, it's very, very convenient. But maybe docopt has some advantages that I don't know. All right. So, and in the same way, right here, we're assuming that we're going to write to the standard, to a file that was specified. But if we didn't specify an output file, then path out will be none. So we say if path out is none, then we need to do something to write to the standard output, and else we write to the file that was specified right here. Now, how do we write to the standard output? That is very simple, actually. We just say print mdout. Right, so what kind of logic do we have here? Maybe I should comment the code a little bit. It's always good to comment the code. Parse command line arguments. That's maybe not actually, should I comment that? I always feel when I'm commenting code, you want to add comments, but only things that are not already obvious from the code itself, right? Because if you add obvious things, it just takes space. If no input file was specified, ... read from the standard input, else read from the input file. Okay. Do the actual parsing. If no output file was specified, ... write to the standard output, else write to the output file. Okay. So now we have a little bit of useful comments. So let's see whether this actually works, right? So how can we check that? Well, so remember that cat demo.md will actually print the output, print the contents of demo.md here to the output, just to the terminal. If we say, let me clear. If we say cat demo.md and we pipeline it, as it is called, with this vertical line, that's typical Unix, Linux, Mac OS stuff, basically. This will not work on the Windows, unless, of course, you install the Linux subset for Windows or whatever it's called. And we pipeline it into our program, .py. Then it will actually print out almost the same thing, but you see that now it has actually done the parsing, right? Captured the output. All right. If we now do, again, almost the same thing, but we write it to demout3.md, we have an alternative way of parsing parsing the code, or basically parsing a file and writing it to a new file. If I switch back to Rapunzel, you see here we have demout3.md. So we have demout.md, which we created by using a markdown code exec as a module, demout2.md, which we did by sort of specifying an input and an output file, and demout3.md, which we created by using this kind of Linux pipelining thing. And it works very well, I think. So now we have, so if you have questions, if there are questions in the chat about actually how to do this aspect of creating a command line app, I hope it's kind of clear. I feel also this is already, the first few episodes were kind of rough in terms of difficulty, but here we're actually really doing something that I think is quite doable, right? While waiting for that, let's actually really now, because we're doing the entire code workflow, Python coding workflow. And part of that is, of course, after you've made some kind of notable improvement, then we're going to commit this to Git. So I'm going to use my favorite tool, Git GUI, but there are many other tools, and we talked about that in the previous episode. So I start Git GUI. Just to remind you, here are the unstaged changes, which are the things that Git doesn't know about, but that you might want to do something with. Well, the demo out things, we don't want to do anything with it. But here's the script the sort of the top level script that we created with the name is main. That's what we want to get. And here is our module, the app module. So we also want to get that. We click on it. And by clicking on the changes, we move them from the unstaged changes to the staged changes, which, remember, are the changes that we are going to commit, that we're going to give a name and actually log as such. So turn module into command line app. So this is the name of the commit that identifies what I say up, commit, push, I push it to GitHub. There we go, it's gone. And actually maybe, so if I go to GitHub now, up, say up, GitHub, as Mathôt, markdown, code exec, you will see that here we have our commit, turn into command line app, right? So that's the thing that we just did. It would also make sense, I think, now to actually tag this. Let's say that this is release 0.1.0. We're going to polish it later, but this is already a release-worthy thing that we did. How can you do that in Git? How can you tag a release? Well, you can say, I'm going to do this now not in the GUI, but on the command line, but it's the same thing. I type this slash just so that the cursor goes to the next line. That's a bit easier for you to see, I feel, that way. I say git tag release 0.1.0. Up, there it is. Git push origin release 0.1.0. Up, it pushes it. What does it mean to push a tag? Well, it basically means if we switch back to GitHub, I reload the page. It means that here under releases, you see there is one tag. If I click on it, tags, you see that this is release 0.1.0, and this sort of gives us a point that is anchored to the current state of the code, right? And that's what a release is, right? It's sort of a snapshot of what the code is like right now. Nipodam asks, my employer requires me to make command stuff with PowerShell. Are there so much differences versus Python except that Power? Yes, I think, well, I'm not a power user of PowerShell, so maybe I'm underestimating everything that PowerShell can do. But my understanding is that PowerShell is kind of like a batch script-like language, right? For very simple operations, whereas Python is a full programming language that allows you basically to do everything. And as Morpheus is basically seconding that by saying that there are a massive number of libraries for Python. So. But I'm saying that with some caution because maybe actually I'm underestimating what PowerShell can do. But I think for real sort of, I would say for scripting type of things, which are basically a few commands that you want to execute in a row, things like PowerShell or Bash are fine. For things that correspond to actual programming, you don't want to use those kinds of things. You want to use something like Python, I think. Not necessarily only Python, of course, but something like Python. Now, with that, what have we done today? We've actually accomplished quite a bit, I think, again in 30 minutes. We've taken our module, turned it into a command line app. And the most important things to learn from this are basically that to create a command line app, generally speaking, you create a function that serves as an entry point, sort of the thing that is called when you run it from the command line. Later, when we're going to create a package, you also see that this entry point will also be used in the packaging process. In this entry point, you parse the command line arguments, generally speaking with the argparse library, but we've heard there's also docopt and maybe a few others to do that. And we've created a top level script that does very little else except importing the app function, checking whether we're executing this from the top level, whether we're executing this as a top-level script by checking the name variable and then calling it. And that's it. That's everything that we did. Now, if you're watching this back later, this is where the episode ends. So thank you very much for watching Python Live Lessons. If you are watching live, then I'm happy to take a few more questions if there are any.